Session of the General Assembly, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, Your Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, it affords me great pleasure to congratulate you on your election to direct the work of this historic 75th session of the General Assembly. Such an honor bears testimony to your undoubted dynamism and diplomatic skills, which will in no small measure positively affect the outcome of the work of this Assembly. I assure you of my delegation's full support and cooperation in all your endeavors during your tenure of office. Permit me also to pay tribute to your predecessor, Professor Tijani Mohamed Bande, for his outstanding leadership of the 74th session. We congratulate him also on the many initiatives that he took in the furtherance of the work of our organization during arguably the most challenging session in this century. To Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I extend my country's gratitude and support for the sterling work he continues to do against great odds. We particularly commend him for his efforts and commitment in transforming the United Nations development system. We also recognize his tireless efforts in the daunting task of strengthening and streamlining the peace and security architecture to better integrate prevention, peacemaking, and peace building. The energy towards a global ceasefire during the pandemic is worthy of special mention. Mr. President, I wish to acknowledge this session's theme, the future we want, the United Nations we need, reaffirming our commitment to multilateralism that is not only apt but also greatly inspired. 3/4 of a century ago, our forebears came together in San Francisco and signed the Charter of the United Nations. This session, therefore, marks the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations. We do so at a critical time and juncture in human history, which calls for true reflection on the role of the United Nations in the 21st century, the organization upon which humanity continues to place so much faith and hope for a better life for all. Since that time, the United Nations has been and will always be the symbol of humankind's fervent desire to conduct its affairs for eternal survival. The United Nations has achieved and made significant strides in addressing many of the serious challenges facing the international community. When the dark clouds of war threatened to engulf the world with a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions, humankind found the strength within itself to negate Armageddon. We also recall that the UN played a significant role in easing the pangs of decolonization. The purpose and principles of the UN Charter continue to be relevant today as they were 75 years ago. The United Nations has had to grapple with crisis situations in many parts of the world in pursuance of its mandate to maintain international peace and security. As today's problems grow ever more global, multilateralism and solidarity are more important than ever. We should remain steadfast against the reimagined threats on multilateralism and global cooperation. We believe that a coherent and feasible strategy for the future, committed resources, streamlining priorities combined with responsible and inspired leadership are the prerequisites to achieving a relevant and vital UN for the future. This will go a long way towards fulfilling the ideals for which the UN was formed. Mr. President, Lesotho reaffirms its commitment to advance a collective vision of an effective United Nations to ensure a prosperous and lasting future for all our peoples. The world is indeed witnessing a revolution in information systems and their integration into the lives of men, women, and children. There can be no doubt that for some, information technology and globalization are beginning to turn theoretical possibilities into fact, as the use of computers and computer-dependent systems have resulted in improvements in basic health conditions and increases in life expectancy, efficiency, and productivity. Unfortunately, the majority who have been left out of that prosperity continue to live in conditions of extreme poverty. The challenge for the UN of the 21st century is to eliminate those disparities by bringing the poor countries into the digital age. Mr. President, this historic session of the UNGA comes at a sensitive time when the world is faced with a deadly COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused economic stagnation, loss of jobs, and many fatalities across the globe. This has posed serious challenges to our organization and exposed weaknesses and vulnerabilities in societies and economies around the world. The virus attacks all, regardless of ethnicity, faith, affluence, or nationality. In conflict-ridden areas, the situation is dire due to health systems that have collapsed. On this note, we commend the Secretary General for calling for a global ceasefire in all corners of the world. We support his determination and commitment in the fight against this pandemic. Lesotho believes the international community should collectively adopt measures that are focused on a holistic approach and close coordination within the UN to contain the spread of the virus. Measures against future pandemics should include ease of access to vaccines, medication, and essential equipment. Pandemics respect neither internal nor external borders. Cooperation and collaboration across and amongst nations, including the essential pillars of multilateralism, becomes more essential than ever. Mr. President, the coronavirus plague has escalated the vulnerability of people in need and has created fear and despair amongst people living under oppressed circumstances. We condemn all acts that result in displacement of women and children. Lesotho recognizes the leadership of the Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women for her exceptional work in leading global efforts for improving the living standards and the rights of women, and in particular, the inception of the Gender in Humanitarian Action Program for COVID-19. We commend all efforts to mobilize the UN system, along with all relevant United Nations agencies that are helping in humanitarian and security interventions. Mr. President, Lesotho welcomes and appreciates the 2019-2020 Secretary General's trenchant progress report towards the Sustainable Development Goals and aligns herself with the principle of leaving no one behind. The report reveals that there has been some considerable progress in the implementation of SDGs. However, it is trite that the international community is not on track to deliver by 2020. It is also shocking to learn that the number of people suffering from hunger and malnutrition increased, especially in countries in special situations like Lesotho during the reporting period, while at the same time, climate change is reported to be occurring much faster than anticipated. We are meeting here, though virtually, at an opportune time during the commemoration of the UN 75th anniversary, which coincides with a decade of action that is intended to increase the momentum and implementation efforts on SDGs. Indeed, our commitment to strengthen partnerships and international cooperation has never been so critical to provide solutions to our collective global challenges. By virtue of being a least developed and landlocked country, characterized by a weak macroeconomy and fragile fiscal policy space, Lesotho will bear the major socioeconomic brunt of the pandemic and thus remain at high risk of being further left behind. Mr. President, devastated by coronavirus and weakened health systems, Lesotho may